Tonight, we have an exciting lineup of speakers who will share their thoughts on these debates. Without further ado, it is a great pleasure for me to introduce our speakers for tonight. First, we have Antonio Andrioni, a professor of development economics at SOAS University of London and co-director of the SOAS Center for Sustainable Structural Transformation. He also holds the position of Deputy Dean for Research of the College of Development, Economics and Finance at SOAS. In South Africa, he holds a distinguished visiting professorship at the Research Chair in Industrial Development at the University of Johannesburg. He has published extensively in leading journals and has written a number of books, with his most recent books being Structural Transformation in South Africa and From Financialization to Innovation. Last but not least, Antonio is also an advisor to several international organizations and national governments in industrial policy making. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Professor Antonio Andrioni. Our second speaker is Elvis Avenyo. He is an associate professor at the South African Research Chair in Industrial Development at the University of Johannesburg. Before joining the chair, he worked as a senior researcher at the Center for Competition, Regulation, and Economic Development at the University of Johannesburg. Prior to that, he also worked as a research officer at the Technology and Management Center for Development at the University of Oxford. His research lies at the nexus of industrial development, technical change, and innovation in developing countries. He has published extensively in leading journals and co-authored several background papers for international organizations. Ladies and gentlemen, once again, please join me in welcoming Professor Elvis Avenyo. So just a quick rundown of today's program. Professor Antonio Andrioni will kick off with the first presentation, focusing on the broader developing country and African context. This will be followed by Professor Avenyo's presentation, speaking to emerging issues on digital industrialization in South Africa and drawing out key lessons. This will then be followed by a Q&A session where participants engage with the different presentations, provide comments, ask questions. So without further ado, I'll give the floor to our first speaker, Professor Antonio Andrioni.
Thanks so much. Thanks, Shingi. Great. Thanks. I think we are good to start. Thanks for having me, and good evening, everyone, here and online. It's a great pleasure to share with you some of the work that we've been doing, also very much in collaboration with colleagues here at the University of Johannesburg and also colleagues across the Atlantic at the University Federado Rio de Janeiro. I know Elvis later will build on also some of these issues. So I wanted to address the topic, looking at, of course, digital transformations and looking at both potential new divides and why is that these technologies are spreading, but in a very asymmetric way across industries, countries, firms, and looking at also the opportunities and the policies that would be necessary in order to actually look at the absorption and diffusions of these technologies. And here I would like in particular also to build on some of the work that we've been doing, looking at the interface between not just industrial policy, but industrial and competition policy in the context of digital platform. A few years back here in South Africa, with a team of colleagues, including Simon Roberts and others, we produced a digital white paper for the government at the time where the government was very concerned, interested in understanding how fundamentally negotiation in the WTO and other agencies were requiring an understanding of management of data, ownership at the country level, and at the same time, how digitalization was already an important aspect related to competitiveness and several types of transformation in terms of, for example, addressing the energy crisis, which had been, of course, a major problem in the South African and other African countries situation. Most of this research now is continuing also in our center, where, of course, digitalization is a very much cross-cutting theme when we think about the restructuring of value chains, the enablement of energy systems, the new infrastructure development, including connectivity in the continent, and so on and so forth. And of course, a strong focus is on how industrial policy are shaping some of these dynamics, and even more importantly, how business models are changing in the face of this new major technological transformation. Most of the people, when they think about digitalization, they have in mind this kind of pictures, because they have been the way in which many reports and commentators have articulated the idea of what digitalization is. The idea that there is a sort of linear pattern that goes from the first, the second, the third, and the fourth industrial revolution. Now, some people even talk about the fifth or the sixth. And the distinctive element of this, what people call fourth industrial revolution, is this so-called spread of digital technologies. Now, I would like to, in a sense, challenge a bit of these ideas and try to locate actually this debate in the context of a number of African countries who have been dealing with, again, the challenges, the opportunities of digital technologies, and also looking at how the leading players in this space are actually building up their capacity in key particular production technologies that use digital solutions. So I'll do basically three things. I will start just giving an introduction to when we think about digital transformation, what are we really talking about. And secondly, I would like to focus much more on the divides and gaps. What are the causes and mechanisms? Why is that some countries are seeing a diffusion and are benefiting from these technologies, while others are very much lagging behind? What are the mechanisms or the causes that make for these divides? And thirdly, I would like, as I mentioned in the very beginning, reflect on the extent to which traditional industrial policy alone might or might not actually be sufficient to address the current digitalization, in particular, the emergence of digital platform. In these days in South Africa, we have celebrated the 25 years of the Competition Commission. And of course, the traditional approach of competition authorities and commissions from globally, but in particular from the continent, has always been to look at various forms of abuse of dominance position of firms in the sectors. Now, of course, these kind of problems have become even more problematic or more critical when we look at the way in which digital platforms are exercising power in many of the markets, so-called multi-sided markets in which they operate. And of course, this is an important dimension because lots of the routes to markets are now mediated by these platforms. So what do we do in order to make companies engaging with these technologies while at the same time being able to reach these new markets? We'll build on several projects, papers, work we have been doing, also working with firms, in particular here in South Africa, but also in other contexts, and in particular, also the work where also Shingi was involved on structural transformation in South Africa, which came out a couple of years back. Now, let me start with saying that when we think about the where African countries stands in these linear pictures, actually, the reality is that the technologies that are involved, and we look at them in 1 second, they are very diverse and they are developing at different levels of maturity, and they are integrated in products, in technologies in many different ways. And the adoption of industry, we will look at later at robots technologies in particular, it's very diverse. I mean, there are few sectors where really these technologies are picking up, while others actually are operating in a quite traditional way. And of course, the geographies of these digital technologies are concentrating in few parts of the world. I will show you later some data on where digital global value chains are emerging and concentrating. When we think about countries like South Africa or Morocco, who are more at the forefront in the continent in the adoption of these technologies, even in these countries, if you want, we are very much operating at this intersection of, if you want, third, second, fourth industrial revolution. Effectively, in each country, you can visit firms that are using very old technologies for almost the second industrial revolution, up to those who are experimenting solutions and benefiting from these technologies. In a country like South Africa, for example, we've been working a lot in sector related to mining equipment, and looking at how companies are using digital technologies for improving the use of materials, predictive maintenance, or collecting data on the use of the technologies. Normally, when people think about the digital technologies, they are focusing on a cluster of things that go from, of course, various forms of automation, robotization, what goes under the broader idea of advanced manufacturing, but also within that, production technologies that are used for prototyping products or producing small batches of products like additive manufacturing and 3D printers, and many other technologies that are very much related to the opportunities that data offer, in particular big data analytics offer in terms of making productive activities much more predictable, much more manageable, much more precise in terms of what is achieved. And of course, artificial intelligence is just one of the further iteration of these complex algorithm and data analytics solutions. Many of these technologies are offering, in many areas, incremental changes. And in fact, some of these technologies are, if you want, an extension of what people call the ICT revolution. The divide between information communication technologies and data analytics is there, and I will talk about that. But effectively, there is lots of continuity, more than a break, a revolutionary break in this technology. We see much more an incremental evolution. And there are, of course, other disruptive changes that these technologies can bring about. The impact of these technologies, in particular, when we look at production technologies on jobs and skills, again, it's very difficult to assess. In fact, I will talk about robot technologies later. There is no clear evidence that actually they are going to be impacting dramatically employment. We've done work here in South Africa, where in the automotive sector, actually, robotization has not had an impact on employment. Effectively, the real reason why employment has not been growing is because the demand for cars, in particular in the South African continent and in the African continent more broadly, has been not there. And so there is very difficult, it's very difficult to make investment and increase employment. And in general, many of these technologies, when they're applied across different sectors, they can have disproportional impact, and they can generate all sorts of new forms of divides, in particular, when we look at people who are trying to enter the labor market and are fundamentally lacking a number of skills that are required to engage with digital technologies. Lots of this revolution is not just about technologies, but effectively is about the new business model and business architectures that allow to use and leverage this technology, in particular data. When we think about the global major companies, the largest companies in the digital space, they are all operating as platform. And being a platform means being able fundamentally to operate in multiple markets, leverage data, and shape this market through this data. And behind this platform, there are important principles that have been, if you want, changing the way in which innovation and technologies are developed. If you think about lots of the technologies that we use in the digital space, require lots of open innovation in terms of sharing, for example, same standards, the same language in algorithm. But at the same time, there are lots of opportunity within platform, as we will see later, to actually capture the opportunities that these openness offer, and so creating mechanisms through which extracting value from these platforms. So platforms are complex beasts in a sense, and they are very much modularized. So they are building up on different layers of these technologies. In South Africa, many of you know there is a famous company called Discovery. Vitality is the program that has been spreading around. And this platform operates across banking. When I landed, I saw there was an advertisement of their banking branch, insurance, health sector. They operate in the space of offering incentive for people to go to gyms and so on. And so the question is why this complex modularized platform has been developing in this way. What kind of opportunities are there? Now, of course, these technologies offer lots of opportunities, but the reality is that these opportunities are nested within this platform, and many of these platforms reinforce dynamics that we've been seeing in many value chains of actually value extraction more than value creation, meaning that many of these platforms have so much power that they can extract lots of the value that eventually firms that are plugged into it are generating. One last element before getting closer to what is happening in many countries. People, when they think about data analytics or this kind of platform, they think in a sort of transversal way. They have the idea that these technologies are pretty much applying across all sectors. But actually, as also the work that Xing has been doing with us, looking at application of digital technologies in the African continent, we realized that actually what is happening in these different sectors, it's actually quite sector specific. Yes, it's true, digital platform operate across many of them, but actually the technologies underpinning this platform and the digital solutions that in each sector we find are very diverse. The sensors that are used in order to make a logistic chain on a cold chain for exporting citrus to Europe are very different from those that go in a robotized cell in the manufacturing of cars. As much as the Internet of Industrial Internet of Things that you have in digital minds is not the same technology really of what you find in another sector. So the nature of this technology is one in which you have both opportunity for transversal application, but at the same time, when you look at the specifics of each sector, they are never manifesting in the same way. And this is important to understand because it tells us that these technologies are offering or are potentially transforming all sectors of the economy, but that in order to capture the opportunities that they offer, you need to have lots of specialized knowledge about what these technologies do in each specific sector. And this leads me to start engaging with the problems that we see when we look at the diffusions of these technologies. Technologies that have high potential for transforming the way in which production works, value chains develop, but at the same time, technologies that have been emerging across countries and generating new forms of divides. Some areas or some sectors being very much engaging with them while others lagging behind. Well, what are the causes and mechanisms for that? And let me start from a key important aspect to recognize that many of these technologies are not so easy to deploy, not so easy to absorb, to diffuse across countries, because they are never about just one technology. They are systems. They are integration of different things. If you think about in the agricultural sector, the use of a drone, within that drone you have a plurality of both digital and non-digital technology, software and hardware solution. So if you are trying to enter in this sector and build up capabilities in producing these drones, effectively, you have to leverage lots of knowledge capabilities from different fields of science, of material science, electronics, sensors, digital solutions, and so on. So effectively, what digitalization has done is open these opportunities by integrating different types of technologies into new products and solutions, which require, for those who are producing them, to master different type of capabilities. And this is what we have found when we've been trying to do lots of analysis on looking at specifically what mix of capabilities you need in order to be able to engage with this technology, even just deploying these technologies. And this is implication in particular when we think about how firms are trying to catch up or enter into these value chains, and how also we train people in order to make them able to engage with these technologies. We've done some work, for example, with the different skills authorities here in South Africa, and the so-called CETAs. I'm sure Elvis will talk more about that later. And what we see is that in many cases, because there are quite weak foundational capabilities in science and a number of science fields, it's very difficult to leapfrog into these technologies. It's very difficult to start using them. We visited many companies that can see immediately the advantage of using these technologies, but they find very difficult to make that jump because there are foundational capabilities missing. While the jump is made, things get much easier because these technologies can be deployed in different ways. You can actually see a spreading of application across different sectors and value chains. And we've been trying to understand, working also with vocational education training institutions, why is that it's difficult to actually reform curricula, but more importantly, creating that symbiotic relationship between firms that need skills and broader institutions that are training that. I'll come back to that later if you have time in the Q&A. Many of these technologies also require, exactly because they leverage different fields of science, require quite a lot of basic research happening and quite a lot of capabilities developed also downstream in the development of the technology. This is a metric that is used also in South Africa and many countries, which look at different stages of scaling up of the technologies. And normally the problem in countries which are quite developed, have big pockets in terms of investment in R&D, is to make sure that there are not so many gaps in the intermediate stages of development of these technologies. In many low middle income countries, the big problem is that there is not just a simple gap in the chain of development of the technologies, but effectively that the volume of investment are very low, not comparable to the needs that are required. So when we were doing work with the Science and Technology Institute here and department in the ministries, when we're looking at the budget allocated for developing a specific sensor technologies or a specific new advanced material solution, well, these were very small resources, right? So the threshold for being competitive in this area is very high and is keeping moving, which means that even if countries try to make an effort, the threshold keep moving faster. And so there is a sort of Red Queen effect there. This is not for all countries. Actually, there are countries, especially in Southeast Asia, where these challenges have been faced over the last decade, and where we have been seeing a significant actually involvement, engagement with digital technologies. We have developed a six-digit of trade classification of product, a new classification which allows us to identify around 150 products that are traded internationally, digital products, and we have been trying to see, okay, who is actually buying and selling these products? Where the value chains are developing here? And the picture is quite clear. We've done for several years. The most recent one shows that you start seeing the development of very strong regional value chains around digital products that involves countries like Vietnam, China, Malaysia, Thailand, and so on and so forth. So the picture is not just a picture of the simple traditional story of the global north controlling these technologies, but the emergence of new regional apps. Let's look at, just to understand a bit more cases specific. So far I talked about general technologies in the digital space. If we focus, for example, on a key digital production technology, robots, what do we see? Well, we see that, first of all, very few countries are engaging with these technologies, the usual top countries in terms of the, if you want, level of expenditure in R&D or technological advancement. And that in most of these countries, there are very few sectors that are using this technology. That goes back to my point that these are technologies that have scope for application, which is quite sector specific. So until recently, the automotive sector accounted for more than 50, almost 60% of all the robots in operation in the world. Now electronics is picked up as the sector that leads more the absorption of these technologies. And what we've been doing, we've been trying to see what are the countries where these technologies are diffusing the most. China today is the country which has the largest operational stock of robots, both in per employer manufacturing sector, number of employer, but also in absolute terms. And we've been trying to see how China has managed to develop these hubs across the country, in particular starting from the so-called Made in China 2025, which was a strategy launched in 2016 for catching up on these technologies. And the result is quite striking. We can see that a number of parameters of competitiveness in this area are rewarding a quite significant effort in this space. We know that this is not just a story about robots. The current so-called chips war is also part of the same effort and global technological race in these technologies. What is interesting about the China case, in the case of robots, is that not only China is catching up in patents applications or more R&D activities, has been able to attract most of the international producers of robots, Japanese companies, German companies, and so on, but has also been able to start becoming a hub for exporting this technology to countries in the global south who are, for example, in need of relatively less sophisticated but effective robot technologies to actually automate a number of sectors, in particular in electronics and the automotive. When we look at then what are the countries who are buying all these technologies, or what makes them different, what is driving the adoption of these technologies, we find strong evidence that, as I mentioned before, those countries who have built foundational capabilities, who have already managed to reach a certain level of capability development measured in different way, and where there are business organizations who are able to master these technologies, we see that these countries are becoming those that attract the most these activities. For example, we made some comparison between South Africa and the automotive sector and Thailand, and along the value chain in the automotive sector in Thailand, first-tier, second-tier suppliers are actually adopting a significant more amount of these robot automation technologies. And we've been also going within firms to try to understand not only if they are picking up these technologies, but how they use them. Because ultimately, as I mentioned, this is not about simply a standard technology, it's off-the-shelf technology. In many cases, companies that have been already using automation robots over the years, they've learned their own specific way to adopt these technologies and have a competitive advantage in doing so. So in South Africa, we have visited, for example, the 6-7 OEM that are fundamentally producing cars in the country, and we found that actually their way of using the technology is very, very different. It's very much connected to their way of designing products and organize the production process. So the Toyota case here in South Africa is one of a company which has been trying to design their cars, their products around production lines of robots so that they didn't have all the time to invest in new capital expenditure to buy new technologies. They were trying to optimize the cost structure by using similar lines of robot cells. While we were having cases like the BMW or Mercedes, where effectively they were designing their products and then designing the technologies around that, right? So very different approaches which have implication in terms of quality of product, competitiveness, and so on. Now, the issue is that things like robots or the kind of technologies I was referring before, when they're actually used in advanced manufacturing, they're all basically communicating with each other. If you visit a factory nowadays that use industrial Internet of Things and so on, effectively all the machinery are actually communicating with each other. In some cases, the paradox is that because we are still in this process of engaging with the technologies, companies are still not clear what to do with all this data. But they are still, these production technologies they're using are allowing them to start actually testing, experimenting with the data that becomes available. And this data is accumulated more and more, both in the production space and in the consumption space. In the consumption space, of course, through the kind of digital platform, the Amazon of this world, which have become an important, if you want, interface between the traditional markets and the industries, value chains as we knew them from the past. Many of these are often presented through this nice Bible's picture. This is Anke that has been producing these kind of representation where you look at the top 100 digital platform by degree of market capitalization, and you see that fundamentally, well, interestingly enough, Africa has a couple of platforms. The case of the company I mentioned before is actually a company, Discovery, which tried actually to penetrate also the US market, and is at the moment is operating in the UK market, for example. But most of these platforms are, of course, concentrated in the US with the very well-known GAFA, so the Apple, Microsoft, Facebook, Alphabet, and Amazon, and of course in China and the broader regional hub I was showing you before. Now, the first thing to realize is that many of these are in the specific countries in which they operate are operating in a regime of almost monopoly, in the sense that they are the main, become the main interface between consumers, markets, and value chain producers of products. And in fact, many of them, they've started themselves producing products because they can use lots of the data that come from their platform to actually outcompete the traditional industries that sell this product through them. So they can learn what consumers like and how to optimize the characteristics of these products against the price point of them. Now, many of these kind of platforms, first of all, they're very diverse, right? If you think about Facebook and you think about how Amazon operate or Apple operate or Alibaba operate, they all have developed within the same platform model different ways of capturing value from their activities. Some of these techniques are the old ones. The other day we were discussing about value chains and how value chains and firms can squeeze their supply chain or they can control and capture value there. Similarly, platforms are reproducing the same type of, if you want, techniques, and they're doing differently according to where they operate, in what sectors, if they're operating mainly in a B2B space with industrial data or in a B2C space with consumers data. The main issue here, and I'll come to this picture now in the next slide, is that the fundamental issue that we observe is that if in the past a monopoly player was able to fundamentally extract lots of value, capture lots of value by exercising a monopoly price markup, so basically fixing the price to a certain extent or squeezing different type of suppliers, in the context of platform, the power that this platform have goes far beyond just fixing the price. Actually, they are able to shape the market and to, if you want, do a sort of rule setting. If you think about when Google is able to identify who is going to appear first in the ranking when you try to search for a specific product or a specific information, that is beyond simply saying what is going to be the price of these different services, actually prioritizing access to that specific kind of product for specific type of firms. In many cases, they can not only exclude rivals or create some form of, if you want, preference or some form of giving some advantage to specific players vis-a-vis others, they can also operate in a sort of, if you want, very pervasive kind of operation across different sectors of the economy. The case of Discovery I was making before, of a company which started offering incentives for people who had a healthy life standard. For those who are in South Africa, I know what I mean. The possibility of going to the gym and getting points because you had, done certain type of things or you had a healthy lifestyle, actually sounds like innocuous, but actually allowed the insurance company to segment the market and segment profile of risk of different players that need to go, especially in a country like South Africa with so many operating through private insurance, to actually be priced in their insurance according to their risk profile. Ultimately, this creates very disproportional impact, because if you're someone who doesn't have a so-called healthy lifestyle or doesn't have that kind of profile, is going to pay relatively more than someone who actually is perceived as a less risky actor. So effectively, this platform allows to do lots of complex things, have lots of functionalities. I'm getting there. Lots of functionalities that are very powerful and very helpful in some cases. We know lots of firms, small firms across the continent, have tried to reach global demand by putting their products into some of these platforms. But the risk is that because they have so much power, they can extract lots of rents from this kind of power position. And if you look at, for example, all small, medium enterprises across the continent who are trying to put their product here, on average, they are already getting between 25, 30, 35% of their price captured by the platform themselves. So you are actually taxed, so to speak, or you are receiving this significant value capture from the platform as a result of that. And the ultimate problem is that because this platform can put together lots of data, can exploit lots of network effect, which basically means that the more people you have in, the more the data is accumulated and the more valuable the platform is. And the more they can use this to generate economies of scope, so moving from one activity to another, use data for different things. And the more they have economies of scale, the more power they have. So there is this fundamental problem here that firms might benefit from being part of a platform, but effectively they are also squeezed because the platform exercises lots of power. And this ultimately determines the extent to which there is this balance between value creation and value capture. So what we've been doing with Simon Roberts has been working through specific cases across South Africa. And in this paper, you can find also in a Oxford Digital Pathways paper, background paper, more cases around South Africa and the region. We've been basically trying to figure out how to unlock this problem that I mentioned here, how to navigate this relationship between power and opportunities that platforms offer, and what kind of different industrial competition policy would be required. To a certain extent, the argument is that you need industrial policy here from the point of view of making companies more capable to engage with digital technologies. But if you do that and you do not have also competition, can create value, but they cannot extract that value. They cannot capture it. And nowadays, this link between industrial and competition policy, which in the past was less articulated, is getting back into the discussion. And we have leveraged the work, for example, that Alice Amsten, Ajit Singh, and others have been presenting ideas like optimal competition, which came out from the Korean experience and other experience in the past. And this is a particularly interesting place to talk about these issues, because South Africa has been in the competition commission space quite at the forefront of challenging this dichotomic relationship between industrial policy and competition policy. And actually, there has been an idea that competition policy need to complement and actually be inspired also by industrial policy principle in terms of not simply pursuing static efficiency, but also dynamic efficiency. I'll stop there and look forward to the discussion later.
Okay. Thanks, Shingi, for the introduction earlier. And I would also want to start off by thanking the APORDE team, so Nikki, Roselle, and the rest of the team for having me here. It's quite energizing to come back here as an APORDE alumnus. And also, of course, I believe Antonio's insightful presentation that set me up quite nicely into discussing some of the emerging issues that we do see, particularly from our work in South Africa. But before I start off, I would want to also disclose that my presentation this evening sort of extracts quite extensively from the work we've done at CRED when I was there, but as well as with collaborations with Antonio himself, with colleagues from the Federal University of Rio de Janeiro, and Alejandro and others at UNIDO under the research program of the Industrial Development Think Tank. And quickly on the Industrial Development Think Tank, it was a 6-year research program established in 2017 under a memorandum of understanding with the DTIC, and also in partnership, which was largely a partnership with the Center for Competition Regulation and Economic Development, but also as the research chair in industrial development, which are both at the University of Johannesburg. And the fundamental objective of the IDTT was simply to try to provide some research on the basic challenges that is confronting South Africa's industrialization trajectory, but also trying in several ways to, based on the research as it's emerging, provide some advice, guidance, but also some capability around how South Africa and the region as a whole can industrialize, but also can sort of achieve some level of structural transformation going forward. And one of the key publications, and Antonio showed this quite quickly, was the structural transformation book that was published in 2021, edited by Antonio himself, Fiona, Simon, and Palm. And one of the key things that emerged from that book, as well as from other earlier publications, was that South Africa has relatively sort of performed poorly, particularly when we talk about industrialization. This particularly is due to several reasons. One of the key reasons is that we do see over time low investment in the productive sectors, but also in productive capabilities, particularly in the country. But one other factor that is also quite emphasized a lot is the inability of the country to sort of diversify from the minerals complex, from the minerals energy complex, but also the inability of the few large firms that we do see dominating the economy to be able to better link up with some of the smaller firms in the economy. And these, we all do know, leads to some of the challenges we do see in the economy, the higher and increasing unemployment. We do see issues around the inequality, but as well as simply the poor service delivery across the different sort of province states, but also in the country as a whole. So often the basic question then is, how do we reverse some of these challenges? How do we sort of try to re-industrialize fundamentally? If you believe, of course, that industrialization is what sort of resolve some of these issues. And we do see that, of course, there are recommendations around the need to try to drive investments in some of the productive sectors largely, but also the need for us to try to generate linkages in the sectors that we do say are productive, but also the fundamental need for us to build capabilities in these sectors. What is emerging, of course, and Antonio also showed this chart, is simply that the digital industrialization, the digital revolution offers some solutions for this the transformative process. We can discuss, and Antonio's presentation also touches on it, we can discuss whether the industrial revolution is actually a revolution or an evolution, right? And Antonio's work and other colleagues did show that these technologies are simply a fusion of pre-existing technologies, right? But we do know as well from their work that the fusion of these technologies do offer some opportunities and challenges that could drive the industrialization process that we require. There are also other works that do indicate that the very fundamental fusion of these technologies generates new processes, generate new technologies, but also generate new ways that we can do things in ways that can generate the sort of revolution that we are discussing. So then the incremental, and Antonio referred to that, the incremental effects of these technologies, or probably if you want to say the disruptive effects of these technologies, depends on how we are able to better capture the technologies and use them in ways that solve some of our basic problems. The World Economic Forum does sort of summarize some of the challenges that may emerge from the revolution. And we do see that some of them do present some opportunities, but also we do know that some of them are quite big challenges. And we do see quite clearly here that there are actually opportunities for firms to innovate and increase their productive activities if they're able to adapt and use some of these advanced digital technologies. But we do see also there are issues around inequality, and of course, there are issues around ethics and how some of these technologies could actually disrupt some of our labor markets. So I think generally there is a degree of consensus, I must say, about the prospects of diffusing and using and adapting advanced digital technologies, particularly at the firm level, where we do see some evidence around the potential to increase productivity, the potential to create new businesses and new firms, and the potential largely to integrate into some of the global value chains that we do see are quite useful for our industrial activities. But also, particularly in the South African case, the fundamental potential to sort of reverse the deindustrialization into the realm of reindustrialization, but also in ways that we can sort of keep pace with some of the technological advancements we see also in the developed countries, but also in similar middle-income countries. But what we do see emerging, particularly if you take some of the policy documents in South Africa, is that there is evidence that South African manufacturing firms are largely unprepared to, first of all, adopt some of these technologies, but also even barely adapting them into their production processes. And what is also quite fascinating is the fact that particularly at the firm level, there's very limited understanding of how this is happening. There's literally, in certain cases, anecdotes from specific sectors, but also anecdotes from engagement that do not necessarily provide us with the sort of the comprehensive evidence, particularly at the empirical level, that we may need to sort of try to drive policy to think about some of these issues, but also fundamentally to understand what is happening, particularly when we consider our manufacturing enterprises. So what the IDTT research program on digital industrialization sought to do was simply to understand some of these issues at a much granular level, with collaborations across with collaborations with different people. What we noticed in our attempt to do that was that there's even no data, particularly at firm level data, to be able to use to understand some of these issues. And also beyond that, there is literally very limited empirical evidence on some of these issues. So what we did is to first of all provide some micro level data and macro level evidence around the adoption behaviors by our manufacturing firms, but also trying to exploit, which I'll show later on, some of the empirical relationships when we consider some of the very fundamental questions when we talk about digital industrialization. Conceptually, there are different ways in the literature that people are trying to classify sort of digital technologies, or we say technologies more broadly. And we do see here the work by Ferraz and others who classified largely the technologies across the different generations, which largely also sort of fits quite nicely into the different types of the revolutions, but across the different business functions. And the business functions fundamentally looks at the uses of these technologies, right? And this work, I must say, also sort of stems largely from work by others like Lal and Antonio themselves. We try to understand some of these technological capabilities by looking at the specific business functions. So that conceptualization or the different business functions and the use of technologies, but also across the different generations, form the basis largely of our data collection process that we did in March 2021. It sort of was based on some other country experiences, because there are data sets in Brazil, in Argentina, but also UNIDO also undertook a similar research where they collected data on Thailand, Vietnam, and Ghana that we also sort of leveraged. And our objective was largely to try to understand the current uses of these technologies in manufacturing firms, but also some of the sort of future prospects of these technologies. And of course, as a primary survey, we also sort of try to understand some of the very basic firm characteristics of these firms. We had some difficulties, so we focused much more on collecting these data at the CETA level, where we collected data from largely firms belonging to the MESITA, to the CHITA, and the FPNM CETAs. And you see here that from about 7,432 invitations sent or emails sent, we were only able to obtain 7% reliable information from these firms. And we do see quite a bit of classification across the different CETAs there. A caveat with that is that what that means is there's no way our data set is representative, and there's no way that we try to say that some of the empirical analysis that we did with the data is anyway sort of generalizable to all manufacturing firms in South Africa. But we do believe, based on the fact that there's limited evidence in this area, we do believe that the analysis and the data provide some useful insights that enables us to understand some of these issues that we are fundamentally looking at. And one of the emerging evidence that one of the things that emerged during the data collection was that there were very limited firms that are, particularly in South Africa, in our sample, that were actually using our so-called sort of fourth industrial revolution technologies, or our so-called fourth industrial advanced digital technologies. So what we did was simply to reclassify the very basic classification system we're using by saying that all technologies that were generation 0 and 1 were largely manual and semi-automated. Generation 2 technologies were fully automated and ICT enabled, but also generation 3 and 4 technologies were digital system enabled. So this classification largely forms, the reclassification largely forms the basis of our empirical analysis. And when I say that we advanced digital technologies, what I'm simply referring to is a digital system enabled, which combines both generation 3 and 4 technologies that emerge from our data set. Yeah, but in cases, particularly in terms of the uses of technologies, we do observe some firms that say they use the so-called fourth natural revolution technology. So we did also, from the very basic descriptive, we do show some of these technologies to also show some of these behaviors. So then what I want to do quickly is to give you some insights into some of the very basic descriptives we do see when we simply just graph some of the key variables. And these charts simply shows the usage of technologies across the different business functions. And what is quite obvious here is that manufacturing firms in our sample are still very much reliant on manual and semi-automated machine technologies, but also to a large extent, fully automated and ICT enabled. What that simply means is, and Antonio also mentioned this, is that firms are still reliant on old technologies. We do see quite a small percentage, a small proportion of the firms that are sort of showing indication that they're moving towards some of these technologies, but they're still quite limited. And we do see that degree of heterogeneity also emerging when we simply plot our adoption behaviors of firms across the different business functions. We see that as well when we just simply plot the data across different firm sizes. And what it simply shows is that small and micro firms tend to even be at the lower scale of adopting these technologies as compared to medium and large firms. And of course, that is also in line with the literature. And when we also break these down across the different manufacturing sectors, we do see this degree of heterogeneity also emerging. Firms are still largely reliant on these old technologies, and these also across the different sectors, even those very sophisticated minimum and high-tech sectors are still very much reliant on these old technologies, with very few of them using our advanced technologies. So there was a question also, particularly focusing on the future orientations of the use of these technologies. What that simply meant is there was a question asking, in 5 to 10 years, do you see yourself moving towards the usage of these technologies? What we do see clearly here is some optimism for the usage of our digital-based system-enabled technologies. And we do see quite a sharp sort of a marked shift from what the chart I showed you before, where the blue part of the graph was largely dominating, towards the orange part and the gray part also coming through. What it means is firms are quite optimistic about sort of moving towards some of these new advanced digital technologies over time. Of course, these things could change depending on a lot more factors. Could be COVID coming again, or etc. And to give you a sense across the specific uses of these technologies as well, we do see a sharp increase in the future orientations of the firms. They want, and they're looking forward to using and integrating these technologies a bit more into their production processes in 5 to 10 years. And this cuts across all the uses of the technologies, the product development, process management, as well as customer relations. And then, of course, to try to explain, or probably get a feel of what specific factors could be explaining firms' adoption behaviors, there was a question on what is preventing firms from adopting some of these advanced digital technologies. What emerged quite quickly, quite strongly, and I'll get back to this later, is the lack of capital question, right? And the skills question also quite emerging strongly. And I'll show you later on how these are playing out in some of the empirical works that we've done. But I also wanted to mention quite quickly that we've been trying to exploit some of these questions as well in a very comparative process, where we've been collaborating with a host of colleagues to understand some of these issues a bit more. And what has also emerged quite quickly on the comparative work is the fact that South Africa generally tends to be lacking in both the current adoption of these advanced digital technologies, but also when we compare it to other middle-income countries, they tend to be lacking in the future orientations. What I wanted to say quickly with that is, this is simply the proportion of firms in our sample that are using these technologies, right? It doesn't necessarily say, and Antonio emphasized this point, doesn't necessarily say anything about how these technologies are actually used and how these which specific sectors are using these technologies. Because we do know a robot, for instance, in a specific sector in a country may not be used the same way as in a different country, in the same sector or in a different sector. So I think that caveat is also quite important. But this gives a general overview or general feel of some of the adoption behaviors. So these sort of questions, I've been trying to exploit all these in a number of work we've been trying to do, where myself, Jason, Julius, Akred, and then of course our collaborators have already mentioned, trying to explore some of these questions. And we do think that the IDTT program has generated a knowledge base, particularly in South Africa, that serves as some preliminary evidence around these questions. And I'll go quickly to sort of touch on some of the questions that we try to answer and how we try to do it across the different empirical papers. And one of the fundamental questions that we try to resolve, or we try to sort of throw a bit more light on, is why is it that what is fundamentally influencing firms, manufacturing firms, from adopting the fourth industrial revolution technologies, as we may call it, or what we call digitally advanced technologies. And the approach we took is trying to bring out a bit more heterogeneity in our evidence, right? There is evidence by colleagues from UNIDO that simply examined the effect of, let's say, GVC integration on adopting advanced digital technologies. So what we wanted to add to the literature from that perspective is to look at the specific uses of the technologies, because we do know technologies are used differently and they're composite uses of technologies. So our approach was simply to try to bring out the evidence from that heterogeneous perspective. And the framework we used, relies on the framework developed by Baldwin and Lean that fundamentally classifies some firm characteristics into different groupings. What the approach sort of afforded us is able to generate some of the inherent characteristics that we do see emerging from firm characteristics, but also in a way helping us to sort of conceptualize some of these factors quite differently. So what emerged from the analysis is, and in line with some of the descriptive statistics, is again the cost-related constraints, right? What that simply means is that lack of capital largely influences the adoption behavior of firms, but these depend on the specific use of the technology that firms are adopting. And also the human capital question came up, and this also tends to differ around their specific uses. But what is also quite insightful from our analysis is that we do see differences in the specific activities of the firm. So older export-oriented firms, but also firms that are foreign-owned, tend to have a higher degree of adopting these technologies, even if they face some of these constraints that I've mentioned earlier. So then, what benefits do firms that actually adopt these technologies get, particularly when we consider firm performance, and why should we sort of say that they are prospects, and why should we promote the adoption and diffusion of these technologies? So we try to also examine that fundamental question, right? By simply trying to develop an approach that helps us, first of all, to sort of overstep some of the fundamental econometric issues, but also gives us a much more strong relationship between the two variables we are looking at. So what we did fundamentally is to sort of compute sort of a CETA level digital digital adoption index that we used then to try to explain how that then affects different indicators of firm performance. So here we used employment, we used export behavior, and then also we used innovation. What emerged also from that analysis is the fact that firms that are able to adopt advanced digital technologies tend to have a more likelihood to export, but also tend to have more likely to innovate. But we do not necessarily see any effect on the employment question, right? So what that also means is, from our first analysis, we do see some heterogeneity in the factors that influence adoption of digital technologies. This analysis is also showing that digital adoption of digital technologies adoption of advanced digital technologies influence differently outcomes of performance. So then, largely, and to wrap up, is the question around skills, right? And Antonio also here emphasized the importance of sort of building foundational capabilities and how that is important for driving digital industrialization. And then, of course, there are now different policy documents, particularly from the DCDT, but as well as the white paper that Antonio mentioned that CRED developed in 2019, but also on the Department of Higher Education, trying to emphasize these points and for the need to develop the capabilities, particularly for South Africa to be able to leverage the opportunities emerging from the digital industrialization. What we do see when you actually sort of work or examine these policies closely is that we do not necessarily, also if we do not know what we are calling digital capabilities, we do not necessarily know how to measure digital capabilities, and we do not necessarily know how, what factors influence digital capabilities, particularly in South African manufacturing firms, right? So what we try to do, particularly in this paper, is to try to sort of provide some evidence on those sort of questions. There is in the literature a lot of literature on digital capability, on productive capabilities. Antonio has done a lot of work and colleagues on foundational capabilities. So what we wanted to do is try to use that literature to try to understand a bit more what we mean by digital capabilities, right? And we do see here a framework that was developed by Antonio that tries to classify activities across productive activities, but also technical change across the different functional forms. So what we did is simply to go back to our data to try to see what specific questions relate to digital capabilities that fits into any of these functional forms that was theorized about in that particular framework. And then we did a very simple exercise trying to generate some of the inherent correlations between these factors to be able to group them and then to classify them into the different functional forms that we do see in the framework. What emerged is this sort of relationship, right? And what this simply shows is that based on our analysis and our data and sample, we do see four main dimensions of digital capabilities. We do see the investment and product design capabilities. We do see the process organization capabilities. We do see production organization digital capabilities, as well as the linkage and cooperation digital capabilities. And the essence of that is simply to emphasize the point that there is no one thing called digital capabilities. There are multidimensionality to it. And it's also quite important when we're formulating policies or thinking around policies around the fact that there are different dimensions to get capability, and then the policies need to react to some of these dimensions appropriately. So what we also did is simply to do an exercise that tried to explain then, given that we're able to measure digital capabilities now, what influences a particular firm to have a higher digital capability, whilst a particular firm to have a lower capability. So we try to explain that as well. And what is also quite emerging, interestingly, is the diversity of the factors that influence what we are calling digital capabilities, right? For instance, we do see age to be quite negatively related to the linkage and cooperation digital capability, but we do see factors such as the skills based depending on the digital capability that we are looking at. It has either positive sign, positive relationship, or negative relationship, reinforcing the heterogeneity question. So to conclude briefly, and I see Shingi signaling me, is the fact that there is a fundamental opportunities in adopting and adapting digital industrialization, as you may call it, and there are opportunities as well in what Fiona and Antonio says around trying to sort of break into link link back, also try to keep pace with technologies. But, and this also comes back to Antonio's point around the emerging inequalities, because different firms and different sectors are adopting these technologies at different speed and scale, and these effects are generating the digital divide that we do see, particularly in our work as well. So what is quite important, and we do know in the South African context, departments and policies tend to be siloed. It is important to try to get to a point where we formulate integrated digital industrial policies in a way that takes into consideration some of the fundamental objectives that we are looking at, right? So there's a need, particularly for skills policy, to be in line with the technology policy, education policy, competition policy, as Antonio mentioned, but also fundamentally investment policies, because those are ways that we can sort of marry all these policies. And I think it's also quite important to do this from a very sort of collective coordination point of view, bringing in both the public and private sector in a way that we do know the gains from some of these opportunities can be shared across the different sectors and firms that would want to grow. I would like to stop there, and I look forward to the conversation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, so. So I will now open the floor to our participants to engage with the two presentations in terms of giving comments, asking questions. I will get up so that I can read any questions from our online participants. So in terms of our online participants, should you have any questions, please use the raised hand emoji, and please don't forget to say your name and your organization. Whilst our participants in the room are still pondering on the presentations, I'll start off with the questions that have been posted by our participants online. The first question is from Ronald Ragosha, and is asking, would the link to the structural transformation book referenced by Elvis be kindly shared? Definitely we can do that. The second question as well is, data centers are notorious for substantial energy consumption, yet the digital transformation is underpinned by data. What do the speakers recommend as solution to the energy demands of the transformation in light of the fact that Africa is home to the world's most energy impoverished countries? I'll ask another question. I think I'll take 2 or 3 questions, and then I'll pose it back to the speakers. The second question is from Michael Khan. Are you running estimations based on the limited returns from the skills survey? Also, how was the sample frame generated? Another question from the same participant. The small return makes for questionable findings or not? Do respondents attach common meaning to activities such as R&D and innovation? I think that was quite a mouthful. The last question from Simam Kele is, how can the government drive digital industrialization faster within rigid industrial development policy? So I'll pose back these questions to our speakers, but it's also an opportunity for our participants to also engage with the questions, should you have views and opinions around the questions that I've posed. Antonio, you can go first.
Thank you. Yes, maybe I'll start with the data centers one. I think one of the issues that we try to clarify is that, first of all, there are different types of data, and given also the figures that Elvis was presenting, when we look at South Africa as probably the country where there is more engagement with these technologies relatively to other countries in the continent, still that engagement is quite limited, which means that the productive sector is still actually grappling with the idea of using data and collecting data. So effectively, from the industrial data point of view, we are quite far from actually situations where the economy is able to generate so much data that justifies significant data centers or things like that. When you look at consumption data, so data that comes from people like us buying products online, or the example I gave before around discovery and vitality program, and providing data through our use of the internet, digital technologies in general, of course, there is quite significant engagement. In fact, when we look at the digital reports from UNCTAD, we see that there has been a significant amount of new data creation happening also in the continent. And in fact, lots of the debate has been around who is going to own this data. Rwanda, I think a few years back, tried to put forward, following India and other countries, some form of national strategy to avoid that international platform could collect data from the continent and capture the value from that. But of course, in many respects, these are very small economies where the amount of data, the network effect is very limited. So again, even in the case of consumption data, we are still relatively far from situations where there is a significant amount of opportunity for data center development. But of course, this is something that over time will become an issue. First of all, data centers are not just energy intensive, they are also intensive in many other resources. They require water, they require lots of capital investment, they require grids, network infrastructure. So data centers are just part of an ecosystem of digital infrastructure that, if built in the right place, can be a key node in this kind of ecosystem. And we are seeing that there is now a sort of international competition on where these data centers are going to be located. The picture I was showing you before around this emergence of digital value chain actually also reflect the places in the world where more data is generated, more data center has been built, and so on and so forth. So to a certain extent, the problem of data centers in the continent is a bit far ahead, is a bit, later in the game, so to speak. But of course, when not just data centers, but digital technologies are used, the energy problem is pretty, widespread. We visited lots of firms, for example, in the automotive sector, or also in textile garments. As soon as you have automation technologies, these technologies are paradoxically quite rigid, meaning that once you have set up a plan for producing certain cars and so on, you don't want to have disruption in energy. You don't want, actually, they are very sensible also to variation in energy. And this means that many of these companies have to build up their own supply of energy and to bypass the grid when they can do it if the amount of energy they need can be supplied in a different way. So I think the link between energy and adoption of digital technologies is an important one that would be pretty much at the center of the discussion also in the government strategies. And maybe just to touch upon the last, I think lots of the issues around industrial policy, not just today we have focused much more on the technological firm development, firm learning aspect, but of course many of these issues have a strong political economy dimension. Let me just emphasize what I mean with that. In many of the value chains where there is potential, for example, in South Africa for adoption of digital technologies, as Elvis data before shown, the lack of capital is a major, the CapEx expenditure is a major bottleneck for firms because these technologies are quite expensive they can generate lots of increasing returns, but the uptake of technology takes lots of money. And why is this company do not have the money to invest into it? If we look at the most advanced medium high-tech sector in South Africa, mining equipment, this company do not have money because often they have problems in the value chain to capture the value of what they generate, both upstream because there is significant concentration. We visited firms where they were making very clear that for them, the price of steel and the quality of steel that a monopoly player in the country was putting forward was squeezing significantly their margins. And also they had problem downstream the chain because they were not selling their machinery to random companies. They were selling to EPC, PCM, so engineering procurement companies, which were working with mining houses. And again, they were squeezed in that side. So the political economy of that specific value chain had an impact in terms of the space that this company had to actually make the kind of investment that they could have made to increase the functionality of their products, technologies, and so on and so forth. So I think as any other industrial policy issues, of course, is ultimately a political economy issue to take into consideration. I think the digital dimension just add an extra layer of complexity in terms of, as I said before, the fact that now governments needs at the same time to develop basic skills, more advanced skills, skills in different fields of science. And this put pressure in the way in which these policies can be implemented, can be effective on the ground. So I think it is the old problems of implementing, enforcing industrial policy are equally central in the discussion on digital industrial policy.
Thank you, Antonio. I will hand over to Elvis. I think the question tried to condense a lot of sub-questions, so you can focus on that one. Should I go over it?
No, I think I've captured them. Yeah, thanks, Chingy. And thanks for the questions as well. Anthony has already comprehensively responded to the question on data centers and energy, so I don't think I can give a better reaction than he's done. So Ronald, yes, the Strand Transformation book is an open access book, so you can simply just Google and you can download it. And I think that it provides a lot more information and probably a clearer understanding of some of the issues that we're trying to discuss there. Michael, yeah. So the survey was actually conducted right after the first wave of COVID, right? So apparently firms were thinking about different things than responding to surveys on digital industrialization. So probably that sort of informed the low returns, particularly on the sample. And that there was really literally nothing we could do because we've sent several follow-ups trying to improve the sample, but they were simply just not forthcoming. There was literally nothing we can do. So then the sample we've obtained forms the basis of our analysis. And if you remember in my presentation, I did emphasize the caveat that we do not necessarily infer any form of generalization of our findings and data and probably some of the descriptives based on this very skewed data, right? But we do think that some of the insights we generated provide some understanding of some of these issues that we do see, particularly from the sampling. And the way we obtained the sampling frame was simply reaching out to each of the seaters who gave us their sort of a list of their registered members. So we reached out to all registered members in the seater, and their response was quite out of our hands. How do firms have common meanings or interpretations for the questions? Yes, we do appreciate that certain firms may understand some of the questions quite differently, also depending on who responds in the firm, right? So what we did as well is to provide a guide trying to explain at a very layman's level what each of the questions mean or meant at the time we're collecting the data. So we believe that firms, whoever responded to some of the questions or the questions read the guide, also fundamentally understood what was being asked, and they responded appropriately based on the activities of the firm. So we do not have any cause to suspect that there are differences in what one firm says to be, let's say, a generation 4 technology compared to one other firm. But of course, it's also quite important to highlight that our findings are not in any way representative of the manufacturing sector. And there is need, obviously, for additional work exploring some of these issues. It could be also some of these sector-specific case studies, right? Understanding some of these issues, much more focusing on specific sectors, but also doing an in-depth analysis of some of these issues. Those are ways that we can always improve some of the findings. Those are ways that we can always improve some of the evidence that is emerging. And there's already work that has been done by Shingi. Anthony has already mentioned several work they've done on these issues, going to firms, understanding some of these issues much more at a very granular level. And those all add up to the evidence and understanding that we're trying to generate with this sort of work. Thanks.
Thank you, Elvis. I think Saul's hand was up. Saul.
I'm Saul Levine from TIPS. So I understand where the large firms would get their knowledge and information about the new technologies. So they're in global value chains, they exporters, they're big players. But your smaller to medium firms, where do they get information? How do they know what technologies are out there? Did that come up? Was that raised? Because in your recommendations, Elvis, you look at the policy framework, but for ordinary firms, they're not really interested in the policy framework. They're interested in or maybe they're not interested from some of the sample, but how they're getting information, who they're getting it from, how does it all happen? Did you unpack some of that?
Thank you, Saul. I'll take another question from our participants on the floor. I'll start with Nampla Landani, and then, sorry, I don't know your name, the gentleman in front, and last, the gentleman next to Nampla Landani. Nampla, you can start.
Thank you. So my question is to Elvis. You said that in the survey, what you found is that although firms are not yet implementing a lot of the digital technologies, they are optimistic about being able to implement them in the future. I just want to find out if the survey was able to cover why these firms think so, because as part of the program, we've kind of been talking about industrialization and that Africa should basically re-industrialize. But what we've seen is that historically, Africa has mostly been reactive to a lot of kind of the technologies that are adopted worldwide. So I just want to get a sense of whether or not the firms that you surveyed are actively seeking digital industrialization, or is it more of an kind of a reactive sense that they will adopt?
From my side, I just wanted to understand the effect of digital economy on the labor force. What is the effect of the digital economy on the labor force?
Thank you. Given that you don't know my name, so I guess it's only appropriate that I say it, right? My name is Tubelicious Tole from Great Albatross Research and Advisory. So I just wanted to check, has there ever been a study done to check the correlation between, so the countries that are leading in technology adoption, has there ever been a correlation study done between how many STEM graduates do those specific countries have as it relates to their technological adoption? So because I can, I'm only assuming that the reason why China is leading, it's because most of their graduates are in STEM, right? And the reason why other countries are also leading, it's because most of their graduates are in STEM. The reason why I'm saying this is because in South Africa specifically, less than 40% of our graduates in higher education are in STEM. So, and that also could also speak to the high unemployment, which will also be exacerbated if we are adopting technologies as well. So I just want to check if such a study has ever been done, and if not, why not? Maybe if it hasn't, the reason why I'm talking about it maybe could spark an idea to someone to actually do that. Thank you.
Thanks. I'll try to react to as many as I can. And given that I've done this work also with Antonio, you react to probably anything that I miss out. So forgive me if I miss out your question. Yeah. So based on some of the descriptive statistics that I showed, we do see quite significantly the lack of knowledge coming through quite strongly. There are a lot of firms that do not simply know what we even mean by the advanced digital technologies, right? And though the proportions were much lower than the questions around capital and skills, that also came out quite strongly. We haven't as yet explored the lack of knowledge question, but it's also something we can generally do. And we haven't also explored it across the different heterogeneities that I've shown. And my sense, because we've done these across for finance, we've done this across, we've done this for COVID, is likely SMEs would probably show that they would probably have higher proportions that they do not know about some of these technology. And I think one of the policy recommendations, and this also goes back to the digital divide conversation, is that there is need for some of these discussions. There's a need for policy action that if digital industrialization is a way to go, it's important that firms and SMEs that we do know generate most of the employment, we do know create some of the productivity outcomes, know about some of these technologies, adapt them in their production processes in ways that they can reinforce some of the multiplier effects that they were looking for in particularly. But I think that there's room for us to do that sort of analysis that we haven't done in particular. To Namla's question about optimism, yes, so we do have a couple of questions that try to ask firms to justify their responses, right? And I've shown one in terms of based on the adoption behaviors of the current adoption behaviors of firms, why is it that they are either adopting or not adopting? And I've shown some charts around the factors influencing that. I don't remember we having a question particularly on the factors influencing their optimism for the future orientation. I can cross-check that, but I don't think so. But of course, that could be due to, and during the period we're collecting the data was during COVID, and we do know that there is evidence that sectors that were much more digitized tend to be least affected by some of the implications of COVID, right? So it could be that is also sort of influencing their optimism, but it could also just simply be that they saw digital industrialization as the next step to go. And often what happens, particularly in the innovation literature, is crises tend to make firms a bit more innovative, right? So it could also be that sort of reasoning and justification. But that is also something that we can look into. I'm not sure if Antonio would have a response to that based on some of the interactions he's had with some of these firms much more closely. Effect of digital economy on labor force. Yes, we do know based on our very basic analysis we've done that based on our data, there's no we don't necessarily observe any correlation between the adoption of digital technologies and employment. There are other specific works that have been done, and I think there is this phrase in the economic literature, I've just forgotten the person who wrote that paper now, around that we can see robots everywhere we can see computers everywhere other than in our productivity statistics, right? So then what that also implies, particularly in the US then, what that implies then was there was also very limited evidence of influence of early adoption of these technologies on some of these outcomes. But these are questions that we can explore going forward to understand some of these issues a bit more using sort of some larger sample. And finally, on the relationship between STEM and then tech adoption, we have shown that digital capabilities are quite important for the adoption behaviors. Antonio has done a lot of work on the importance of foundational capabilities. And what is also emerging and from work that I have read around, I've forgotten his name now, from the Harvard Business School, is that particularly in Germany, you cited the case of China, particularly in Germany, what is important for them in adopting some of these technologies is a degree of apprenticeship that they have across some of these sectors. So then it may not necessarily be that you go into school and generating degrees in humanities. I don't mean to look down upon any degree, but what I'm trying to say is simply that some of these technical skills are quite important in sort of the adoption behaviors of firms rather than some very general skills. And we do see some essence also emerging from the Germany case, but also probably from the China case. We can look into the specific skills, and the DCDT does have a report that also emphasizes some of the specific skills that are quite important. And I would encourage you to just simply have a look, and I'm sure that can provide some additional understanding to that. Thanks.
Thanks. Maybe I'll start with Saul's question, because I think it's so important, right? You know, in practice, how these companies end up engaging with these technologies, right? It's not that companies are there, especially in a market where the demand is not particularly strong, where there are all these constraints, the energy. So it's not that firms are there sitting on, lots of small, medium enterprise. I'm talking, you were asking about those, sitting on cash to just throw things at, throw cash on adoption of this technology. And even the big ones, before they make big investment, they are, balancing out if a CapEx investment, for example, in a fully automated line actually makes sense, because the return on that investment presuppose that you have some market that is there and it's going to justify that kind of investment in the future in terms of demand. And we've seen how, for example, in the automotive sector, this has been a clear sign. That's why I was showing different approaches to robotization. In the automotive sector, where robotization has been, for example, the sector where more has been done in terms of transforming the production line, starting from the 60s, of course, the type of robotization now, it's much more sophisticated than that. In a number of steps of the value chain, robots have not been adopted, because human beings actually are quite good in doing lots of things and being very flexible in doing a number of activities. And you don't want to have a completely rigid structure. Moreover, when you think about the small, medium enterprises, going back to those, let's say, suppliers of the automotive sector, big OEMs, this company will learn, or it will have to be, or will be forced to adopt some of these technologies, because their OEMs wants actually them to meet specific quality standards and so on. And so we have seen that a number of first, second, third-tier suppliers are actually incrementally almost forced to get engaged with this technology, because otherwise they're cut out from the value chain. So that's for more advanced value chains or sectors like automotive, that would be the nature of the engagement. For other sectors, we've seen, for example, in garments, textile, or even in those sectors where metals, machinery, and so on, there is need for small, medium enterprises to do a customized product for a company or for export. Lots of 3D printing activities or additive manufacturing has been actually used by these companies, because actually allow to reduce the amount of investment in tooling, retooling the production line. So they try to use in a more captive way, or where they can take a cost advantage, they try to use these technologies and they engage with those. In other sectors, it might be related to the fact that by introducing small sensorization of the product allows you to operate in markets that otherwise you would never be able to get to, right? The predictive maintenance example, machines all had some element of predictive maintenance, but was not made or enabled by a sensor, right? So if I'm a medium-sized or small medium-sized company producing technologies for mining activities, just to remain on the same example, I can relatively easily engage with that, right? And so these are different routes. Ultimately, I think your question is very important, because it shows that the demand side is so important in this picture. It's not just a supply side story, it's where the demand for these things come from. And we see across the continent that digitalization has mainly happened where the demand exists. Demand for digital services, transfer of money, all, if we think about the experience in Kenya, for example, or in Nigeria and other countries. So the demand I mentioned, because in Africa, industrialization has been so thin, doesn't create a demand, that pull that is required to actually encourage and creating the space for company to make this investment. And this is the exact opposite of the story of China. And I'd like to go back to your question about that. In fact, the way in which we managed to estimate which were the regions or the provinces, whatever you want to call them, across China, where there was more adoption of these technologies, was through estimating the demand pool. So where the most electronics, chemicals, and automotive are. And then we triangulated this information with information on new investment of multinational or producing basically robot technologies, production technologies. And you start seeing concentration, right, of activities in different places. Now, when you look at countries where these technologies are diffusing, of course, having skilled workforce is useful and all of that, right? But the reality is that, you know, we tend to have this sort of idea that you set up all the skills and then investment will happen. That's not how it works, right? This works the other way around, right? It works with companies who are able to build up sufficient organizational, technological, productive capabilities that manage to engage with markets with demand, and they start creating more demand for skilled people and skilled people in the digital space. I travel quite a bit. You know, I was in China recently, and we were visiting a place where they were doing experimenting green hydrogen, and in the team of engineers there were 2 African engineers. I was like, why 2 African engineers should be here? Of course, because those skills that are generated in the continent don't find necessarily routes to, you know, productive firms where they can get good employment, good salary, and so on. And so lots of the idea of just creating more STEMs or more skills and then investment will come actually often result in creating lots of people that migrate to other countries to get the kind of employment opportunities that match the kind of training that they've received. Okay, so I think and this is an old issue, right? I think we have been too much fed with the idea that you know, if we fix all the conditions, everything will work. And in fact, the way in which we think about foundational capabilities are much more related to productive technological organizational capability within firms and how these have been developing or not over time. The last point I would like to make is related to this issue of the impact on labor and employment and so on. It's interesting how when, you know, the first round of a discussion around digitalization already 10, 15 years ago have emerged, this was the first thing that people were looking at, right? There's a huge amount of literature which has been trying to say, well, there are more robots and all of that. Well, first of all, robots have been used throughout the last century in specific sector at significant scale. Of course, they are more advanced now, but they were there. What these people were concerned about was much more automation in sectors which tend to have much more labor-intensive activities, right? Automation in providing services to customer in banks or in distribution chains, whatever it is, right? And in these areas, it's very difficult to estimate the real impact because effectively, we do not have very strong data that allow us to make that immediate correlation. In the industrial sector is a bit more, we have some more evidence. And in particular, when you focus on those sectors which tend to have more application robots, where effectively the firms are going to substitute workers only where they need to do so. And there is a CapEx and, if you want, advantage in terms of the price competitiveness of that activity. And ultimately, in certain areas nowadays, it's not a choice anymore, right? So they will substitute simply because if you want to do a certain type of laser injection or whatever activity, you need to have a robot who does that operation. It cannot be done by human being, right? So there are some technological constraints that push in a certain direction, but that doesn't automatically lead to an impact of labor. Labor is repositioned around serving lots of other activities in complex production line and production activities. So the idea that, and we were quite surprised to see even in South Africa, where the automotive sector has been actually struggling to operate at sufficient scale and so on. Even here, the impact on employment was actually not present. And when we look at countries which have a much more global demand booming, like in China and Germany or in the US and so on, that correlation is not there. Another piece of conversation is around this broader automation of services and so on, which is much more disruptive to a certain extent, especially with AI application and new solution.
Thank you, Antonio. I guess this brings us to the end of our session. And just a quick recap of the key takeaway points. I think what the session has shared with us today is that digitalization provides some solutions to reindustrialization. However, it is difficult to leapfrog because countries need foundational capabilities. And while African countries are pursuing this route, the investments are too low to generate momentum to follow this digital industrialization path. There's also the general lack of comprehensive data to ascertain the adoption of digital technologies by firms, but also to measure the productivity improvement benefits of digital industrialization. Lastly, regarding the implications of policy, I think both presentations have highlighted the need of an integrated digital industrial policy that incorporates starting from education, technology, industrial policy, and competition policy in order to ensure a balance between value creation and value capture. I would like to take this opportunity once again to thank our speakers, Antonio and Alvis. Thank you for the insightful presentations. And to our participants, both online and in the room, thank you for such engaging with the discussion and the presentations. Have a nice evening, everybody. Thank you.